Good day, everyone. So this is another discussion in our subject language education research and research in mathematics. So we are done discussing the chapter 1 and the chapter 2. So now we will proceed in chapter 3, which is the research methods and procedure. So before we proceed to our main topic, let us first discuss on how to write the chapter 3. So please remember, in writing in chapter 3, begin the chapter with a brief explanation of what the chapter is all about. This is what I'm saying all the time to you, or this is what I recommend in your chapter 1 and chapter 2. Always put an introduction in every chapter and every sub chapter. Next is writing the introductory paragraph. So this chapter presents the discussion on the research methodology of the study, the subjects, the sampling technique, research instruments, procedure of data gathering, and statistical treatment that will be used for accurate data analysis and interpretation. So basically, the chapter 3 or the research methodology focuses in this area. So, for example, you will discuss or you will describe your subjects and also the sampling technique on how you gather your respondents, and then research instruments and procedure of gathering data, and is that statistical treatment if you will use the quantitative research. So in chapter 3, we have five sub-chapters. So these are the research design, the respondents of the study, the research instrument, the data gathering procedure, and the treatment of data. So bear in mind that in writing your chapter 3, it must contain the following sub-chapters. So let us now first discuss the research design. So, in research design, this is the framework of research methods and techniques chosen by a research to conduct the study. So, the design allows researchers to sharpen the research methods suitable for the subject matter and set up their studies for success. And creating research topic explains the type of research. For example, your research is experimental, the survey research, the correlational, the semi-experimental, or the review. So we will discuss this later on. So research design is also has several processes. So, number one is consider your aims and approaches. So, you have to determine the research questions and objectives and identify the theoretical framework and methodology for the study. So, we all know that the research design is or a research design process is a systematic and structured approach to conduct the research. So this is essential to ensure that the study is valid, reliable, and produces meaningful results. And number one is you have to consider your aims and approaches. Second one is choose a type of research design. So you have to select the appropriate research design. So just like what I've mentioned earlier, for example, the experimental, the correlational, the survey, the case study, or the ethnographic based on research questions and objectives. Third one is identify your population and sampling method. So in here, you determine the target population and the sample size and choose the sampling method such as the random, the stratified random sampling, or convenience sampling. So I will discuss this also later on. So choose your data collection method. So decide on the method such as the surveys or the interviews, or whether you will use observations or experiments, and select the appropriate instruments or tools for collecting data. Next is plan your data collection procedures. So you have to develop a plan for data collection, including the time frame, the collection, the location, the personnel involved, and ensure ethical considerations. So most of the researchers always forget to include the ethical consideration. So I suggest, and you must include the ethical consideration at the end of the chapter 5. So again, include the ethical considerations at the end of your chapter 3. So next is design on your data analysis and strategies. So select the appropriate data analysis techniques such as statistical analysis, the content analysis, or discourse analysis, and plan how to interpret the results. So this process of research design is a critical step in conducting your research. So, by following the steps of a research design, researchers can ensure that their study is well planned, ethical, and rigorous. So, impactful research usually creates a minimum bias in data and increases trust in the accuracy of collected data. So, a design that produces the slightest margin of error in experimental research is generally considered the desired outcome. So these are the essential elements of the research design. So accurate purpose statement, techniques to be implemented for collecting and analyzing research. This is very important uh, in a research design. You have to plan and to strategize and to study the techniques you have to implement in collecting your data. The method applied for analyzing collected data. So, of course, if you study very well your research and you study very well on how to execute and implement your research, you have also to choose the right methods in analyzing your data so we can avoid some biases, some extraneous variable. So next is type of research methodology, probable objections to research, setting for the research study. So of course, you have also to consider the location, whether you can get a sample or from the population in your chosen location. Next is timeline and measurement of analysis. So these are the research design elements. So, a proper design sets your study up for success. So, the successful research studies provides insight that are accurate and unbiased. So, you'll need to create a survey that meets all the main characteristics of a design. So, these are the four key characteristics of research design. So, we have the neutrality, the reliability, the validity, and the generalization. So, again, you have to include the four characteristics of research design in your research study. So in neutrality, when you set up your study, you may have to make assumptions about the data you expect to collect. So the results projected in the research should be free from research bias and neutral. So understand opinions about the final evaluated scores and conclusions from multiple individuals and consider those who agree with the results. So in neutrality, you avoid subjective perception in writing your results and discussion, and also avoid subjective opinion in gathering your information. So for example, you use descriptive or qualitative, it's more on interpretation or describing the results. So you must avoid the subjective perception or the subjective point of view. You must focus on what is the actual and the reality observation or interview or whatever your whatever the treatment or whatever the variables you use. Next is the reliability. With regularly conducted research, the researcher expects similar results every time. So you'll only be able to reach the desired results if your design is reliable. So your plan should indicate how to form research questions to ensure the um, standard of the results. So that is the reliability. The reliability again is you expect a similar result. So for example, you conducted a questionnaire yesterday, and when you conducted the same questionnaire after a month ago, the same results will be collected. So that is the reliability. The validity, there are multiple measuring tools available. So, however, the only correct measuring tools are those which help a researcher engaging results according to the objective of the research. So the questionnaire developed from this design will then be valid. So you have to create a assessment tool that is reliable so you can ensure that that questionnaire is also valid. But take note that not all reliable assessment tool is valid. So you have to make sure that it is reliable and at the same time it is valid. Next is generalization. So the outcome of your design should apply to a population and not just a restricted sample. So a generous method implies that your survey can be conducted on any part of a population with a similar accuracy. So generalization, it must be accurate in general. So these characteristics of research design affect how respondents answer the research questions. So they should balance all the above characteristics in a good design. So this is the example of the characteristics of the research design, the reliability. First, you have to introduce to your readers what is the reliability. You can drop a literature study about the reliability, and then um, in validity, same as in the reliability. So, as a researcher, also, you must clearly understand the various types of to select which model to implement for a study. So, like research itself, the design of your analysis can be broadly classified into qualitative and quantitative research. So, when we say qualitative research, it determines the relationship between collected data and observations based on the mathematical calculations. So, a statistical method can prove or disprove theories related to naturally existing phenomena. So, researchers rely on qualitative observation research methods that conclude why a particular theory exists and what respondents have to say about it. While on a quantitative research, it is for cases where statistical conclusions to collect actionable insights are essential. So, numbers provide a better perspective for making critical business decisions or research decisions. And also, the quantitative research methods are necessary for the growth of any organization. So, I have here a chart that highlights the major differences between the qualitative and the quantitative research. So take note that in writing your chapter 3, you have to identify what kind of research design you are using, whether it is a qualitative research or a quantitative research. So when we say qualitative research, your focus is on explaining and understanding experiences and perspectives, while on a quantitative research, your focus is on quantifying and measuring the phenomena. So, meaning in explaining and understanding, we don't use in numerical data just like the quantitative. In qualitative, we use non-numerical data, so such as words, the images, and the observations. In a quantitative, we use numerical data, so such as the statistics and surveys. In a qualitative, we use small sample sizes. But when your research implies you to use a larger sample sizes or a populations or a hundreds, for example, your sample size is consists of 100 respondents, so therefore you will use a quantitative research. But below 100, for example, 50 respondents, you use only the qualitative research. Next is typically emphasizes in-depth exploration and interpretation, while in a quantitative, we typically emphasizes precision and objectivity. Since in a qualitative, we don't use numerical data, more on interpretation or more on exploration. Therefore, the data analysis involves the narrative and interpretation analysis. While on a quantitative, since we use numerical, we use statistical analysis and hypothesis testing. Next is results are presented descriptively. So when we say descriptively or descriptive, we describe by words or images. While in a quantitative, the results are presented numerically and statistically. So therefore, it involves numerical data. So just like what I've said in the introduction, all math majors should use a quantitative research because there is numerical data involved. And in a research of the English majors, it is optional whether you use qualitative or quantitative. But I required all math majors to use the quantitative research. So next is the types of the research design. So number one is we have the descriptive. In descriptive composition, a researcher is solely interested in describing, just like what I've said, this is more on a qualitative research design, describing the situation or case under their research study. So it is a theory-based design method created by gathering, analyzing, and presenting collected data. So this allows the researcher to provide insights into um, the why and how research. So the descriptive design helps others better understand the need for the research. If the problem statement is not clear, you can conduct exploratory research. So again, the key term in descriptive research design is you describe the situation or the problem why you conducted your research. Next is the experimental research. So this is establishes a relationship between the cause and effect of a situation. So it is a causal research design where one observes the impact caused by the independent variable on the dependent variable. So for example, one monitors the influence of an independent variable such as a price on a dependent variable such as customer satisfactions or brand loyalty. So it is an efficient research method as it contributes to solving a problem. Just like what I've said earlier, in descriptive, you describe the situation or the problem. In experimental, the key term here is you establish the relationship between the cause and effect of a situation. If your research involves finding the cause and effect of a certain variables, therefore you use the experimental research. Next is the correlational research. This is a non-experimental research technique. It helps researchers establishes the relationship between two closely connected variables. So there is no assumption while evaluating a relationship between two other variables, and statistical analysis techniques calculate the relationship between the variable. So the type of research requires two different groups. In a correlational, in experimental, we find the cause and effect. In correlational, we find the relationship between the two groups. So if your research study involves two different groups or more different groups, and you have to connect those groups. So therefore, you use the correlational research design. Next is the diagnostic research. So the researcher is looking to evaluate the underlying cause of a specific topic or phenomenon. So this method helps one learn more about the factors that create troublesome situations. In diagnostic research, again, the key term here is you will evaluate the underlying cause. So there is already a problem existing, and you have to identify the cause of that problem. What is the difference between the experimental and the diagnostic? In experimental, you seek for the relationship between the cause and effect of the problem. In diagnostic, you only have to identify the causes of the problem or the root of the problem. So that is the diagnostic research. Last is the explanatory research. This uses a researcher's ideas and thoughts on subject to further explore their theories. So the study explains unexplored aspects of a subject and details the research questions what, how, and why. So for example, there's already an existing research. So in explanatory research, you explore the other unexplored aspects of the existing research or the existing study. So these are the these are the types of the research design. So we have the descriptive, we have the experimental, correlational, diagnostic, and the explanatory.
So, in terms of research, sampling makes um, or a crucial part of the methodology. So, it is the selection of a subset of the population from a larger group with shared characteristics. So, at some point in your journey of academic career, you may have to conduct primary research, getting you take the opinion of a target population in the process of investigating a research question. So, if you haven't yet cut your teeth on research, you may have your head surrounded with many hows, the when, and where. So, but don't worry. So, we will discuss the respondents of the study. So, due to its open-ended nature, a qualitative study is always going to be a more time-consuming than its counterpart. So, with this in view, these two research methods are generally preferable while dealing with equalitative research. So now we are done discussing the research design. We will proceed in discussing the respondents of the study. So let's first define the participants. So when we say target population and the sample, so when we say participants, there is always a target population and a sample. So the demographic information such as the age, the gender, and the ethnicity of your sample. So always remember when you are discussing your participants in writing your chapter 3, it involves the demographic information, so such as the age of the respondents, the gender, and the ethnicity of your sample. And the procedures for selecting the sample should be outlined, so including the justification for the sampling method, also known as the sampling procedure. And also, you just need also to specify or to explain how you gather your target population and sample, not just their demographic information. So, when we say population, this is a group of individuals that have the same characteristics. So, when you heard the population in a research, this pertains to a group of individuals with the same characteristics. In a sample, this is a subgroup coming from your population that the researcher plans to study for the purpose of making generalizations about the target population. So, for example, the population of Grace Mission College consists of 3,000, and then you just use the 50 respondents. So, therefore, that is what we call the sample respondents. The population is the overall number of students in the institution. So that is the population. So let us now proceed in discussing the sampling procedures. We have two types of sampling methods. Number one is the probability sampling. So this is the selection of individuals from the population so that they are representative of the population. So the key term here, you use probability if you select your respondents from the population as a representative of the population. So for example, you just chose 50 samples from the population. So therefore, that is the representative of the whole population. So you use probability sampling. While on the non-probability sampling, this is the selection of participants because they are available, convenient, or represent some characteristic the investigator wants to study. In a probability, all the students or all the members of the populations have equal chance to be chosen um in your research study. While on the non-probability, you chose your respondents because they are the most available, the most convenient, and that represents the some characteristics that you want to study. You use non-probability sampling. So let us now proceed to sampling method using the qualitative research. Number one is purposive sampling. So when we say purposive sampling, it involves choosing the participants based on the demographic and other characteristics, so such as the preferences, the taste, the income level, and etc., in line with the nature and objectives of your study. Unlike random sampling, purposive one, the researcher actively engages in laying out the criteria for the informants. So only the respondents reasonably satisfying these criteria are invited to participate in your research. Now the question arises, why purposive sampling for qualitative research? So, as mentioned, such studies have no restrictions in terms of time or space to the respondents' input. So, the participants may adjust the spillways of information to any point. So, given this, it is essential for the respondents to be filled with the desired knowledge or be equipped with the relevant skill sets. So, the random selection can barely serve this purpose, which make purposeful meaning sampling a perfect fit for the research study. So you use purposive sampling for the purpose of choosing those um, respondents. So for example, your research study pertains to, or your um, research study talks about the perception of the teachers. So you use the purposive sampling because your target sample or the target respondents is all teachers. So next one is we have the convenience sampling. So when we say convenience sampling, the researcher applies convenience sampling if they target the respondents who are easily available. So the logic behind using this type of sampling for qualitative research is simple. So as told, qualitative research takes a comparatively greater amount of time. So the researchers, when faced with time constraints, we have to make smart choices. So it makes sense to rely on people who are on hand rather than moving proposals with a number of respondents with the least assurance of their interest. So these are just the two sample of the sampling that you can use if your research study is a qualitative research. So these are the sampling methods when your research is under the quantitative research sampling. So um, we've mentioned earlier that the quantitative research design ensures the quicker process of the data collection. So mostly the survey respondents of the participants of a questionnaire have to respond to close-ended questions. So all they have to do is mark their choice or either on a Likert or any other scale or order of questions and submit. In such types of studies, the independent and the dependent variables are well defined and the researcher seeks exact measures. So, number one is what we call the simple random sampling. Again, I put here a quantitative research using the random sampling. Again, for random sampling, this is the generalization of data is possible only if the results represent the entire target of the population. So in a qualitative research, it is attainable through purposive sampling as the respondents go on to any length. So however, in quantitative research, responses are measured in numbers. So the greater the number of responses, the more representative those numbers would be. So in a simple random sampling, it is when you choose participants from a large population without regard to any characteristics. So everyone has an equal chance to be selected in your research study. That is the simple random sampling. So as you can see here in the picture. Next is we have the cluster sampling. So it involves dividing the entire sampling frame into a small clusters and then randomly picking the clusters. So you can pick as many clusters as desired depending on the needs and budgets. So in a cluster sampling, you don't just pick or choose or gather respondents from a population. So you choose instead a cluster, instead an individual, you choose the cluster. Next is the stratified sampling. So it is one of the most widely used methods which involves dividing a population into subsets with shared characteristics. So for example, you group the high income from a low income group. So then you can randomly pick the participants from those subsets. So this type of sampling is suited for projects that involve assessing the interaction between participants' responses to a certain phenomenon and given characteristics. Next is the systematic sampling. So if your research calls for insights on what every second, third, or uh, so on person says about the something, systematic sampling is going to be the top choice. So you obtain the ninth number by dividing the total population by the number of participants in the subset of the population. So those are the those are the sampling methods that you can use. So again, in a qualitative research, you use the purposive sampling and the convenience sampling. So you choose whether between purposive or convenience. When your research is under the quantitative research, you use the simple random sampling, the cluster sampling, or the stratified sampling, and the systematic sampling. So this is the example of how you will write your population. So again, you have to put an introduction before you discuss the subchapter of the research population and the sample. So you can leave a review of literature, or you can put a definition of the research population and the sample. Again, you have to identify your population, and then your sample, and then the sampling method. So after the respondents or the population or identifying the sampling methods, we will now proceed in research instruments. So we are then discussing the research design, the respondents of the study. Now we will proceed to research instrument. So when we say research instrument, this is the tool used to collect, measure, and analyze data related to your research interest. So these tools are mostly commonly used in health science or social sciences and education to assess patients, the clients, the students, teachers, and stuff, and etc. So a research instrument can include interviews, tests, surveys, or checklists. So the research instrument is usually determined by researchers and is tied to the study methodology. So these are the characteristics of good research instrument. So number one is valid and reliable, based on conceptual framework or the researcher's understanding of how the particular variables in the study connect with each other, must gather data suitable for and relevant to the research topic, able to test hypotheses and or answer proposed research questions under investigation, free of bias and appropriate for the context, culture, and diversity of the site, and contains clear and definite instructions to use the instrument. So we have also types of research instruments. So number one is interview. So in interview, this is the or the interaction where verbal questions are posed by interviewer to elicit verbal responses from an interviewee. So we have different kinds of or different types of interview. So number one is structured interview. This is the formal set of questions posed to each interview and recorded using a standardized procedure. While the unstructured interview, this is a less formal set of questions, and the interviewer modifies the sequence and wording of questions. In a structured interview, you already have the the prepared questions or the interview items checklist, while on the unstructured interview, the interviewer modifies the sequence and wording of questions. Next is the non-directive interview. So this is unguided interview, so including the open-ended questions and use of the spontaneous engagement. Next is we have the focus interview, see an emphasis on the interview subjective and personal responses where the interviewer engages to elicit more information. And last is we have the focus group interview. So a group of selected participants are asked about their opinions or perceptions concerning a particular type. So those are the types of research instruments under the interview. Next is we have the observations. So in observation, this is watching what people do. So this is a type of correlational or the non-experimental method where researchers observes ongoing behavior. So, number one types of observation is what we call the structured observation. So, a research conducted at a specific place or time where participants are observed in a standardized procedure. So, rather than writing a detailed description of all behaviors observed, the researchers code observed behaviors according to previously agreed upon scale. Next is the naturalistic observation. So, the spontaneous behavior of participants in a natural surroundings. So the researcher simply records what they see in whatever way they see it. Next is we have the participant observation. So a variation of natural observations where the researchers joins in and becomes part of the group they are studying to get a deeper insight into their lives. So those are the types of observation. Next types of research instrument is survey. So when we say survey, this encompasses any measurement procedures that involve asking questions of the respondents. So the types of surveys can vary on the span of a time used to conduct the study. So they can be compromise or cross-sectional surveys and or longitudinal surveys. So these are the types of survey. Number one is survey research. So the survey research is we use this to conduct study on a span of time, and they can be used also in the cross sectional or the longitudinal survey. So this is a survey method that the any measurement procedures that involve asking questions to respondent. Next is the free answer. So this also referred to as an open-ended question. So this includes unrestricted or essay or unguided questions. Last is the guided response type. So this is the recall type questions asking the participants to recall a set of categories or multiple choice or multiple response questions. So those are the types of research instruments. So we have the interview, we have the observations, and we have the surveys. So after the research instrument, let us now proceed to the data gathering procedure. So when we say data collection, this is the procedure of collecting, measuring, and analyzing accurate insight for research using standard validated techniques. So in the procedure of data, this explains the sources of data. If different instruments were used in collecting data, the study should describe how they were utilized. So for instance, a survey study using a questionnaire should state whether it is an adapted or an original instrument. So either way, the researcher should describe how it was adapted or constructed and validated. So after the collection of data or the data gathering procedure, we have the treatment of data. In treatment of data, this enumerates the formulas used for interpreting the data and explains why they are necessary. So it also includes the scale and verbal interpretation of scores. So if professional help was sought in statistical processing of data, the name of the office or agency or person taking charge of it should be mentioned in this area. So I have here example of the um, research in chapter 3 in writing your chapter 3. So this is the example of data collection. And then this is the sample of research methodology. So first, just like what I've mentioned earlier, you have to put an introduction explaining the content of the research methodology. So for example, this chapter deals with the research methodology of the study, including the research design, the setting, the population, sample, and data collection instruments. In research design, you have to put first an introduction, what is research design, and what kind of research or what type of research design will you use. So whether it is a quantitative research or qualitative research, you have to explain also. Next is the what type of for example, you already identify what type of research design. For example, qualitative, under qualitative, what type of qualitative research design. So for example, here the exploratory descriptive design. So next is you don't have to enumerate or specify, for example, the descriptive, the characteristic of descriptive, etc. You can just put it in a you can also include it in defining the descriptive research design. Next is the research setting and the research population and the sample. So again, you have to identify what is research population and sample. You can also include here the literature review and then explain the population. So for example, here, the research population for the study comprise all of the adolescent mothers aged 19 or younger. So again, in citing your population, you have to include the demographic information, so such as the age, the gender, the location, and etc. Next is the sample. So from your population, how many sample uh, how many samples and what sampling method did you use. So again, you have to identify whether it is a probability sampling or non-probability, and under the those probability and non-probability, what type of sampling. And then you have to introduce it, and again, you have to explain it. Why did you use those probability sampling? Next is in a data collection. Again, you have to introduce what is data collection, or you just simply put the literature review about the data collection and then specify um, how you will collect your data. And then the data collection instrument, for example, you use questionnaire, you have to again define questionnaire and tell something about it. Just like, and then what else? Again, this is very important. You have to include again the reliability, the validity of your research instrument. So, this is what I've mentioned earlier. You have to put at the end of your research methodology the ethical considerations. Okay, so that's it for today's discussion about the chapter 3 of our research. So, again, if you have any questions regarding the topic, you can chat it in our official group chat. So again, reminders, now that I send already the recorded discussion of chapter 3, you may start working on your chapter 3, and the deadline would be on the last week of August. So that would be on August 31, 2023. So again, the deadline of chapter 3, submission of chapter 3 is on August 31, 2023, together with your revision of chapter 1 and chapter 2. So thank you very much and see you on the next discussion.